You know, that makes me feel like playing Wind Waker for some reason. Now, The Legend of Zelda started as a game on the NES, and it was considered awesome. It was the first Zelda game and a good start to what would become an awesome series. The second game obviously was not as well liked as it changed the gameplay style to a mix of the original and side-scroller. This game was more likely than the first to have had mixed reactions. In 1991, Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past came out. And not only was it back in the gameplay style that everyone wanted to play it in, but its graphics blew our minds. And just when you didn't think it could get any better, 1998, our minds were blown again. This time though, it was a completely new experience. This was a jump to 3D. This was The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. For me, this was the first game I ever played, and it put an everlasting impression in my mind of how a game should be made. A few years later, Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask was made, running on a similar layout with graphics and gameplay, but it was highly debatable on how it compared to Ocarina of Time. There were familiar elements, but people did not like how the story, the land, and everything about it was weird and darker. My opinion isn't really clear, but any Zelda game considered good is a Zelda game that I love to play. Finally, we are up to the GameCube. This was released in 2001, and in 2003, Legend of Zelda: Wind Waker came out. Now this took another daring turn. They completely changed the graphics style. Rather than make it look realistic as possible, they made it look really cartoony. They added cel shading, and while many fans were angry, this game was not hated by everyone. This being 7 years later, I'm going to take a look at this classic. The first thing we are going to go over is presentation. Now let's just get this out of the way right now. This game looks awesome. Now this game did not age, simply for the fact that it is not going for the realistic look. It was going for an artsy look. Now today, not much about this game will impress you, but back then, if you were not an angry fanboy, this would look awesome. Boss fights really still show in this game's artistic style. Another cool thing when you're out at sea approaching an island is the draw distance, as it slowly fades into view. Overall, the graphics are not realistic, but again, they're not going for a realistic look. I compare this to Paper Mario. Its look is timeless. Not impressive by today's standards, but for a 7-year-old game, still having decent looks. In terms of sound, the effects are appealing, and the music is awesome. This fits in very well and is nothing short of awesome. Like Ocarina, Majora's Mask, and many others, it is very memorable and definitely adds to the overall experience, with classic Zelda tunes and some new material never heard before. The presentation, though it doesn't look good as it once did, Hasn't aged much. A 5 out of 5. This one is tricky. They definitely put in the effort, as you can see in all the cutscenes, text, and such, that this was definitely well thought out. But it's basically the same story retold again. The Zelda series is notorious for doing that. If you haven't played the other Zelda titles, this will probably interest you. The fact is, though, you have probably seen the story a million different times told in a million different ways. So it's nothing new. Now, if you're the kind of gamer who wants to skip straight to the action, you will not like this game. There's plenty of story, and it's not too much for the average gamer, but it's definitely too much for those specific type of gamers. Compared to other Zelda titles, this is around the same. But nothing that's done differently, like in Majora's Mask or Twilight Princess. For story, I give it a 3 out of 5. Keep in mind that in my reviews, difficulty is not just about how hard the game is, but what type of hard. For example, if it's frustrating, it will not get a good score. How rewarding is it, etc. Stuff like that. Now, if you know your way around the Legend of Zelda series, this should be one of the easier games to play. If you are a Zelda noob, this game should be challenging. The most important thing about this game, though, is that it's fun. The difficulty does not get in the way of the overall experience. This game will throw some challenges your way. For example, the first time in the Forsaken Fortress, you have to sneak your way around because you lost your sword while being launched. This is challenging considering the patience you have to have while being stealthy. Every once in a while you run into things like this, but overall it's not that big of a deal. Now overall the challenges that you face in the main story should be rewarding, but if you take the extra time to do all the side missions, you will not be disappointed. A 4 out of 5. One thing Nintendo definitely knows how to do is to make a good game have good gameplay. Now the controls are just as good as ever, with a few new touches to the swordplay that makes killing enemies even more fun. Now I found one thing that bothers me, and it's not a big deal, but the axis on the camera for the C-stick can't invert. What that basically means is you can't change it to go left when you go right. I never noticed this problem before, but after playing some first-person shooters in recent years, as weird as it sounds, I expect the camera to turn left when I go to the right. It's really hard to explain, but for some people, this will annoy them. Not the whole game, but the first couple of times you play, which should be the first couple of levels. After that, though, it no longer becomes an issue. That's really nitpicking though, and overall, this game's controls are great. But how about the rest of the environment and how it plays out? Now for a Zelda game, this is above average, as they had some awesome things here and there, such as the ability to crawl outside of a hole, and while you're crawling, to go into first person. You can actually pick up other enemies' weapons, and that is satisfying. Nintendo definitely did some extra work here, and it really shows in the controls and the way everything works in the game. A 5 out of 5. Now this is the last thing that'll be mentioned. This in particular is where the game is really rewarding, because when you beat the game, not only are there tons of side missions, but along with that, there are rewards after you beat the game for a second time through. From what I remember on the second playthrough, you can play the game without Link's green tunic. And with the costume he was given in the first level. Not what you were thinking. From what I remember, you also start off with a color camera. And if you did not get that in the first playthrough, well, you have it now. And in the forest area, there's a place where you can go trade pictures to this guy. And he will give you trophies for the characters. This could take up a lot of time, and will make you hooked on the game for months, possibly a year after you finish. I was. Although, I used to have no life, but enough about me. Now, the parts on the sea are fairly tedious, but it does not take away from the overall experience enough to make you not want to play the game. This game will keep you playing long after you're finished. And that is why, for replay value, I give it a 5 out of 5. This was a game that was highly debatable for its graphics, but in reality held the core gameplay that everybody craved. A 4.4 out of 5.